Hello, friends, family, and keepers of the faith to blog number 50, week ending the 5th of February 2023. And I think most people know by now that one of the most difficult things of doing a blog is always the introduction. How do you start? Do you start by giving a brief outline of how you're feeling when you press the record button? Do you do something jokingly? Some sort of parody of Star Trek and captain's blogs and things like that? But all I can say to you really is that I woke up this morning feeling like any other normal day, really, which is good because I didn't feel sad and I didn't feel bad and I didn't feel excited over what the day is going to bring to me. But I didn't feel dejected or anything like that. The sun is out, and really the day is young. So we'll start off like we always do, I think, really, and that is that I talk a little bit about the news of the week, which is just a date stamp everything. And I always bring about what's happening in the war. Most of it this week has been bullet points in the articles that I've read. Rather than go into great detail, they've sort of put the week in general. And really, there was only two that mentioned anything that I think might turn up as a news report to date stamp this thing. Apparently there was an accident at the Odessa electricity substation which has left 500,000 without power. It's the second large-scale accident in the last 24 hours. No news on the cause. Emergency measures are in place to restore power as quickly as possible. No, it doesn't mention whether sabotage is there. It doesn't mention whether it's because of bombings. I can only think that if there's been an accident, there could be, and it's in a war news article, that the constant bombing has weakened infrastructure, which means that accidents are more rife. You know it is where you're in your office building and they say this is hazardous around this area. If there's been bombings and it's been weakened, no matter how sort of cautious you are, you're going to find that it's even worse as a hazardous situation than it was before, and so accidents are bound sure to happen. The other article I read was that Germany has evidence of war crimes and is pushing for prosecutions after the war. I don't think they can do much during the war. After most wars, there have been war crimes that have gone to courts, and that really doesn't tell me anything, and it's what I would be expecting. So there isn't much to say. It's good because it doesn't tell me about the constant deaths that are going on. It doesn't, but of course, it doesn't tell me anything about how close we are for it ending either. So I just sort of have my fingers crossed that this year is the final year of the war and that it's sooner rather than later. This week has been mostly politics in the news. Rishi Sunak is now 100 days into his job as Prime Minister, and there is pure speculation on whether he can turn the Tory party around in time for the general election. He came into power mid-office, but with all of the things that have gone on within the Tory party, I don't think there's any chance of him turning it around. We'll have a different government, but I do believe that government will be no different than the government that we've got in. They're all the same. You know, I have no political standing on this. I mention the news and politics purely just to date stamp this. You'll all have your own opinions. Feel free to mention them, but as far as I'm concerned, it's a little bit of a waste of air to talk about it, because I have no political agenda, and you know, I'm sure that everybody feels the same. We're just disgusted by politicians. And the one news story that stood out this week was about a balloon, which was from China, going over foreign territory and being shot out the skies by the Americans. Apparently it's been spying on military areas. China is protesting about it, saying it's a civilian vessel, just doing research. My opinion of that is, who sends up something to fly across foreign lands without clearing it first? They protest too much, but I hope this doesn't start now tensions to a higher level between America and China, and start yet another war. So that's the news out the way in quite a quick time scale, and really, like I say, it's just a date stamp. This is indeed a warts and all, and the news doesn't seem to have any fun aspects in it in the last year that I know of. So we now do my shout outs, don't we? This is always where it starts to lift up a little bit in our eyes, doesn't it? So as you know, I have certain friends that watch my blog. There are other people, I'm sure, that don't comment, and they're very welcome to do so, and it'd be really nice to send a comment back to you to get some impression from you guys, but that's totally within your own power. These are shout outs to people that did leave a comment or leave a question this week, and they are Down the Rabbit Hole, Martroid, Steve's Gaming, I'm going to destroy this name again, Magda Kazaziak. Oh my god, I'm so terrible at that. I do apologise. I'll get better, I think. Wee Bob Art, Carl To Do, Milfy Swinbuckle, David Retro Gaming Played Badly, and Colin Jones. As you know, some of those names are now becoming quite common to you. Every single one of them I'm very appreciative of. A blog like this survives because of general watchers and friends that continue to support me. If it didn't, it would become more of a diary entry, which is part of what this blog is all about, because it is supposed to be leaving something for my family. But I do try and lift things up and give a highlight to what my life has been like to this point. And that only happens when somebody raises a question that makes me think about my past. Of course, they could be asking questions about how do you see the future. So I look forward to all of those. And usually after I do the shout outs, I start doing the questions. So we're making good progress here. So Carl Todd left a quite late entry in here. He's saying that he thought Randall and Hopkirk last week was a great show. He really liked the idea that I started to bring in about public domain. Yes, public domain doesn't get discs, by the way. Public domain discs don't get mentioned an awful lot, and yet they were a mainstay for an awful lot of us. So it was very nice to sort of like remember parts of my youth in computing, and public domain discs in particular. So his question is, given your love of movies and comics, I wonder what are your favourite animated movies, and also, do you like anime movies? And It's a good question because I've sort of brought animation into things, and I've mentioned anime movies as well. Um, I'll never forget watching Barry Norman and his film review when Akira was a film that was just coming out, and I was mesmerized by just how animation had moved forward. There was these bikes going through Tokyo. I'm sure it's a famous scene in Akira, and just how wonderful it looked. Um, you could obviously tell it wasn't a Western type animation feature, um, and I remember at the time thinking, do I want to watch an animated film with subtitles? Well, and I thought to myself, why not? In a Barry Norman voice, and why not? But I went to see it and I was totally entertained. Um, I should have known more about it, that it was a comic book or a graphic novel type series. I found that out later on. I then started to get intrigued by other anime films, really only knowing a couple of them, like Fist of the North Star and Legend of the Overfiend. They all tended to be very high in their animation, weird in their storylines, and in a lot of them very over sexual. Um, but it's nice to get a flavour of what other countries' animation is. So I appreciated every single one of them and got great entertainment out of them. When it comes to my own history of animation in the West, I've seen hundreds, and they can be things that have just been on TV. There have been the shorts from Looney Tunes that were before Kids Club at the cinema, and there have been the 25-minute segments of cartoons that we all saw through our youth. Jason and the Wheeled Warriors, and Scooby Doo, and the lovely great Hanna-Barbera range, and He-Man, the Masters of the Universe, and Dungeons and Dragons. I could mention a plethora of them, and of course they were mixed in with some of the Marvel ones, which I always took time out to try and watch. And sometimes when you're a child, that's very difficult to do because they'd be buried into a Saturday TV show like Swap Shop or Tiswas, or where it was live action with a 25-minute segment of a cartoon, which generally was split into two as well. One very early in the morning and one that you'd watch halfway through the show, forcing you to watch it because you don't know quite when that segment was next going to come in. But yes, I think I've been most impressed when Pixar and its computer animated animation came in. And that's not to take away anything about hand drawn, because if you've ever watched Snow White or Fantasia, the animation and detail in there is just fantastic, especially when you consider they were drawn in the 40s and 50s. So yeah, very nice memory, and I hope that sort of like answers things for you, Carl. Just like any young lad, I looked forward to the cartoons. So then we get to Colin Jones, wonderful Colin Jones, major sort of like follower I am of his own channel. Friend to me, always wants to help people out in the Discord channel. Very knowledgeable guy. He's got a question for me. It says, I may have asked before in a different way, but given my recent project, which he basically has shown some photographs in Discord even yesterday, he's designing or creating a dual stick controller for games to play, like such as Robotron, and he wanted to know if I've ever considered actually building my own custom controllers. And I have to say yes and no to that, because in my younger days, when I was doing electronics and soldering, I'd have been all over it. But there was a time where I didn't really have the parts. My dad had drills, drill bits, router bits, all of that sort of stuff. I would rely on him to then therefore try and find the bits for me. And when you're talking that far back, the 80s, it would probably be very difficult for me, and definitely difficult for my father, who wouldn't know what the hell he was ordering or getting, to get things, because there was no internet. So I'd have to find a place that would have Sanwa parts or arcade parts. And later on in life, I've not really had the itch to get my soldering iron back out, buy plastic bases, arcade bits, and start wiring things up. And I've become probably a little bit lazy and predictable, and just looked at others doing that thing or buying controllers off the shelf. So a great pity, really. But I think when you've got something as big as my X Arcade stick, which has got a trackball on it, 2 joysticks on it, buttons, a start button, select button, lovely micro switched, proper arcade quality joystick, which is as big as this. I don't think I need really to look for something like a smaller interpretation of a dual stick. It would be nice to have. What I'd like is a spinner. And I know that you've designed one yourself, Colin. So it's a sad state of affairs, really, because you'd think that I would like to start a project up with some of the time on my hands. But what you have to also consider here is that I need to sort of like be sitting comfortably or in a comfortable surrounding because of my back and sciatica. So if I'm stooping for any length of time, I'm in pain for half a day to a day, recovering by laying flat on the floor, which is not fun, I can tell you now. And then, of course, I've got a garage full of stuff that you can't really sort of like set anything up with. In fact, I've made some strides this week because I bought a Black & Decker Workmate, which is a sort of like a mini table for myself, because I've decided that I'm going to do another little project which I think will benefit my mother more than something that would benefit me. So, and then of course I've got my arcade machine that's been a project of mine for about 20 years, my Nintendo 10 arcade machine, which has been stuck in the corner doing absolutely nothing. And really I should be cleaning that up, seeing what's broken in it and fixing that. So I hope that's given you an answer, Colin. I'm sorry it's such a down answer, but I'm so engrossed in how you're doing with your dual stick. Maybe you can design one for me with a Del Boy flavour about it. Well, you never know, might happen. Then we've got Milfy. Now, good old Milfy, we love him to death, and he's always got such interesting questions and usually quite long-winded. As you know, I tend to not read any comments from anybody apart from his, because his might require some background prep. But in this particular instance, it was a couple of lines, and it didn't really need it because I think I would have come up with the same answers anyway. So it says, if you had to live for a year without electricity, so no films, TV, computer games, music players, etc., what would you do to keep yourself entertained? And what would be the first thing you did once your year was up? And it's quite a simple answer, really, because if there's no electricity, the first thing that would go through my mind is why? And what are other people doing? And what could I do to get some of my quality of life things that I've been doing now for 30 or 40 plus years, and I now have to forego because there's no such thing, or electricity is not a thing that you can get anymore. So I'd be looking at all sorts of cheats and ways to do things before giving up that route entirely. So I'd be looking at things like hand crank electricity stations where you would hand crank a dynamo to get electricity. I'd be looking at solar panels. I'd be looking at is there batteries around? Is there any way that I could generate electricity? But the nature of the question doesn't tell you whether I'm living in a world like that anymore. And all it says is you don't have it. So after giving up, and it would probably be a month of giving up, I would be doing the things that only you can do if you've got no electricity. I'd be looking around to see if there's something that would entertain me. I'd probably think back to my youth and say, what did I do when I used to go out and play with the lads? So I'd look for a bike and see whether I could do a bike ride. I'd be looking to see if I've got old things that in the shed, like swing balls, so that I could play tennis against myself. I'll be practicing my serve, seeing if I can go to the driving range. But of course a car needs a car battery, so I'd have to walk there, so that might be out. There's all sorts of things that I would look into to entertain me, but the biggest entertainment I think would be reading, and therefore I'd be reading books that I've always intended to read rather than books that I'm reading already, because I don't read a lot of novels, but I read a lot of comic books, and I read a lot of omnibuses and all of that sort of stuff. And from that point of view, I already do quite a bit of reading, but I'd be moving away from technical manuals, which I get at work, and starting to read probably some of the classics, Frankenstein, Dracula, and then some of the Bond books and autobiographies and all sorts of things. Reading would probably be the biggest thing that I would do. But I do a lot of walking, and it would be very sad that I wouldn't be able to listen to anything, but maybe I would take a book of birds and flowers for identification to keep me entertained while I'm doing my walking. Bird spotting, all that sort of thing. Bit of a boring answer. I'm pretty sure that other people would think of much better things to do, but I'm one of these people that would be so frustrated on why I can't have the things that I used to have around because somebody says it's not around, that I'd be putting my detective cap on to find out why has somebody turned around and said the electricity is off. You know how it is when the internet goes down, you phone up support, you're going, hey, what's going on? Right, I'm going to move away from you, go somewhere else. You'd constantly argue the point until it become blatantly obvious that you're not going to get anywhere. So I hope that answers your question, Milfy, and thank you so much for the constant support and questions. It really is appreciated, and that goes to everybody. And then we've got Wee Baba, brilliant. I love his channel as well. If there is any artistry in you, any desire to do some drawings, whether it be digitally or painting or whatever. Do take a look at his channel. It's absolutely spot on. So he's basically carried on talking about some of the things that he liked in my last blog about YTS and so forth. And then he's asked a question for this week, and he said, I did enjoy text adventures when I was younger, and I looked forward to maybe going through some when I get my Spectrum Next later this year. Good thing for you to do, yeah. I always felt that there should have been a game genre that had elements of text input as well as point and click, but it seemed to me be one or the other. Are there any games that you are aware of that maybe hit the middle ground? Text adventures had, at least in our minds, infinite possibilities of what we could type, whereas point and click, although good, it usually had predefined inputs and lost the freedom of typing in whatever we liked during, including swear words. Yeah. Now, I was a big adventure person. I know that a lot of the people I speak to now, when we're retrospecting games, don't really look at adventure games. And Bob, I urge you to look at Denny's channel, where he's doing a series of adventure games, explaining the history of them, some of his favourites, doing a few walkthroughs. And there is a web link in all my descriptions, and you'll see his link there. And to be quite honest, I love the adventure genre, and I bought many of them, didn't get very far in them, but could see the progress that was being made in regards to sentence structure, on how you could actually read the novel that you were reading, the adventure novel, and then expanding upon how you would try to interact with it. Most of the early text adventures were two words: go north, go south, pick up, that type of thing. And of course, what they call the parser, that is, became much more complex. Yes, you're quite right. We then had the point and click, the stuff from LucasArts, Sam and Max, and Day of the Tentacle, and the Monkey series, Return to Monkey Island, and Beneath a Steel Sky, and so forth, where you see a character on the screen, you see items on shelves and things. There was a big block of text, so you could basically click on the word take and then point to an object in the shelf, and it would go to the shelf and pick it up for you, which is filling in your imagination parts already. But it didn't have a parser for you to actually do it, so you didn't have the old method. And later on I saw games like Deja Vu and Uninvited, which really was the cleverness about those particular games, were that they wanted to show you that you could utilize a Windows interface by having multiple windows open. So if you can imagine you had a kitchen shelf, and you had your mouse cursor, you could hover your mouse cursor over the shelf, and things would expand or contract or even magnify, and then you would click on them and it would tell you a description about them, and you could right click, say, to pick them up. And then there would be a little cursor mount where you'd have left, right, up and down, up and north and south, up and down, for you to move around the adventure. But again, no text parser. It was another way of doing the point and click. So I'm going to point that one to Denny, because I can't think where there was a parser and the point and click aspect of it off the top of my head. I think the adventure system pretty much died a death around the time of the Pawn and so forth by Infocom, which saddened an awful lot of us. And it's nice to know that there are still lots of adventure games out there that are being written now, and they're written in that other style. But I don't think those people are creating anything brand spanking new. The closest one, I think, is one that's coming out later this year, and I think it's called 100 Hours or something like that, where you wake up on an island. There's a picture of this island, and then it uses a sort of a card system, and you use cards to open other areas, like clues to where you are and how you're going to trade when you get to the village and all of that sort of stuff. So you can't move off the island until you pick up a chance card that gives you the ability to open your mind to remember where you are and so forth. So it's a sort of a structured way of doing things. it's definitely unique, not been done before, but really it's still no passer. So I am lost with that one. Sorry, wee Bob. Thank you so much for continuing to watch, and I do hope that me pointing you to Denny might help you out with an answer to that. Definitely, if there's one for the Spectrum next that you get. And then we get to good old Steve. Steve, there's our salute to Steve. Anybody that knows my channel knows that I do everything in jest with Steve. Steve's one of the people that I rapport with outside of a blog. And he liked the show last week, and he specifically has stated that he's liking the topics, me reminiscing a little bit about TV. And I just want to expand upon that a little bit, but it won't always be about TV. It's just that I've done some things outside of the blog, such as playing games, my gaming history. I've talked about films, I've talked about soundtracks. And TV and adverts are the sort of two things that were also big in my past. And I was finding that I wasn't talking about them too much. So that was the natural order, was to stay within my retro aspect and talk about some of the shows that I watched and give a reason on why I like them so much. So he said he really likes that part of things and wanted to know a little bit more about two shows that he used to like. So he's put here, okay, I have two series to ask you about now. Have you seen, and if you did you like it? First one is called Budgie, which starred Adam Faith and Ian Cuthbertson. We watched the whole series again, that's him and his wife, recently, and really enjoyed it a lot. And now number 2, Citizen James. Yes, featuring your old favourite, Sid James. This time it was based around Sid's get-rich-quick schemes, which almost always failed. Do you have any thoughts on these two? And I have to say, in that order, yes, because I remember Budgie more than I do Citizen James. Budgie came about because ITV had their scheduling system very much like a routine. So they'd have a show like The Gentle Touch, which was a woman crime investigative show on a Friday at 9 o'clock. And when that one ended, there'd be a similar crime drama that would fill that slot, which would be a totally different show, but similar type in feel and genre. And I believe that I saw Budgie in a 9 o'clock slot sometime in the mid-70s. So it would have been past its run. It would have been cancelled and being shown as a repeat. And I'd have been, but I was young enough only to remember certain things about it. I remembered the interesting theme tune to it, which had, I don't know quite how to explain it, because it sounded like a person saying wow a lot. Wow, 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 wow. You know, like this. And it had our main character trying to pick up money which had been blown up in the air. It was almost like raining pounds, and he was sort of like trying to grab this money. And that was the only thing that came to mind when I was thinking about it, until I actually typed it into a search engine, Budgie, and then it all came flooding back. Yes, of course, Budgie was a character, always a little bit edgy in regards to being lawful, trying to make a quick buck using scams. You mentioned Ian Cuthbertson. I think Ian Cuthbertson was quite a largish character, sort of person that leaned heavy on Budgie to get money for him, for his criminal empire, if you call it that. It was sort of like a lot of these get quick scheme shows. I mean, you could say Minder is that, with Arthur and his dodgy dealings. But that was more a family orientated show, and Budgie was more a little bit more on the edge, I would have said. I have great memories then of it flooding back because I saw what Adam Faith looked like and I went, of course I remember Adam Faith, the singer. My God, why didn't I remember this just by the word budgie? Because I tell you what, until I actually did the search on budgie, I was thinking of Shelley. And Shelley was a totally different show, a comedy show like that, but similar in the fact that the main theme of that was whistled rather than a person going wow wow a lot. So you can imagine why I'm getting confused. And being a 1971 show, I went up to my mother and this week, and I said, somebody's asked me about Budgie, Mum. Do you remember Budgie? She went, no. What was it about? Parrots or something? Birds? No. It had Adam Faith, and she went, oh, yes, I remember it. And then she just turned around and said, I watched a couple of episodes. I don't think it was something that she watched either very much, because the year it came out was after the second birth in our family, me being the second, the first one being my sister. So she would have been very busy changing nappies, getting us to bed and all of that when that was going on. And my father would have probably been on night shifts or whatever a family has to do, to survive. So that was great. And then when it comes to Citizen James, I remembered it only because, well, just to give you a story, I was a big Doctor Who fan. And back in the day, when VHS tapes were being released, me being the researcher that I am, knew that the BBC had scrubbed a lot of episodes. But I also knew, through a lot of clubs that I was involved with, that the audio recordings were salvaged. That meant that you could find amongst certain clubs contact addresses to get audio tapes of episodes that were scrubbed. So there was no film aspect. You plugged it into a Walkman and you listened to the story as if it was a play, or an audio book. Because of my love of comedy, I did the same with Hancock's Half Hour. Now, Hancock's Half Hour wasn't as badly broken up in regards to the junking of the show, although it has had that. It's just that there were radio shows of Hancock, and therefore I did the same thing and listened to Hancock's Half Hour in an audio format. So it doesn't take too much of a joiner to work it out that I actually listened to Citizen James from an audio perspective before I saw it as a video perspective, because it came out a good 10 years before I was born. So, but I did manage to find out later on that there were an awful lot of those episodes that weren't junked. They are quite well preserved, and they are sometimes repeated on channels, satellite or Freeview channels. So my memory of Citizen James was from an audio perspective. So I hope that's answered your question, Steve. I really loved it because I love Sid James. I think I got great enjoyment listening to them as audio, because although there are sight gags where that wouldn't work, you got the gist of the story, and the stories were always simplified, something easy to follow, just like any story of On the Bus is, or Mind Your Language, or or any of those 70s shows. You could actually quite easily adapt it to a radio play. So I hope that's answered your question. And we move to David. Retro games played badly. He said, I've thought of a question for you that you might not have had. Which of your favourite films would you love to see a sequel to? Yes, we've had this, David, but don't worry, you're new, and what I've mentioned before when it comes to sequels is that I've always like the idea of a sequel because you want more of the same. But the thing about it is if there's no natural progression from a director's point of view, what is there to do? So I think I gave the analogy last time of Spider-Man and Sam Raimi. He'd got to the third Spider-Man film, which he says after the first film and the talk of making a second, that he had a trilogy in mind. And what he intended to do after the trilogy was to move the story forward several years and show an older version of Spider-Man, and it would have been another trilogy, but with our hero a little bit older, a little bit wiser, which sounded absolutely great. And of course, it never happened. Most people do sequels along the route of the Alien route. Alien, a fantastic film, Ridley Scott, must watch. Had a sequel many, many years later, really, when you consider it, done by a totally different director, James Cameron, and a totally different feel, where the first one was more a stealthy horror with in science fiction. Aliens was more all-out war with numbers. So we're talking about thousands of aliens going after the Queen, sending up our hero to be in peril again, this time with a mercenary army, and a corrupt agency that doesn't want anything killed. They want it to bring back for their own profit reasons. Two totally different aspects of a film that starts off a franchise. Those things work, but then there are things like Three Men and a Baby, and then Three Men and a Little Lady, which are just similar things, and all you see is the toddler is the star, really, because it's the things that they say that I don't think really work, and I grimace when I hear that they're making a sequel of something. Now, you've mentioned a great film that you'd love to see a sequel of, which is Big Trouble in Little China, and hey, I'm well behind you on that. But then I thought about that film before as a sequel, and I thought to myself, where do you go with it? Do you do something that happened at the same time with totally different actors? Do you do them years later, with still looking out for the green-eyed princess, etc., etc.? Do you have the same director? Is the feel totally changed? Is it in the same universe? And to be quite honest, every time I thought about it, I kept thinking, would I rather just have the story as it is and just remember it as just being one of my favourite films? And I think I came back thinking I'd rather keep it as it was. As much as I love the characters, I think I'd rather see something like that not be made into a film, but maybe into a mini-series. Do you remember that if you didn't have enough money to make a full series or season of something, and if you didn't have the money to make a sequel or another film of it, that you went down the route of the mini-series, where it was 4 episodes shown over 4 weeks in hour segments that would, if you put all 4 together, you'd have your film, but it was done with TV production values. Maybe Big Trouble in Little China could be mothballed out and turned into a mini-series. That might work. So that's my answer, I think, to that. And I think that's all the questions. No, now there's one I missed. Sorry about this. So Doug Scullery sent a question, and I mentioned last week that I didn't think all the questions were there, but it could be that questions might have turned up in one of my older blogs, and therefore I needed to look back. And Doug Scullery did one 2 weeks ago. So last week, that ping that I heard was him actually putting in a blog he wanted in for this week, but he put it in the segment for the week previous. So he reminisced about the Carry On stars, and I totally agreed Peter Butterworth was a fantastic actor. But he gave me a quick brain teaser. What's the retro gaming connection being referred to here? And it's a quote, and it says, "For the last time, follow the rules, old chap." And to be quite honest, without looking, because I found this yesterday, I did no research, I could not think where that came from. For the last time, follow the rules, old chap. And it's got a retro gaming connection. So I can only think something along the lines of Grange Hill and school days. It could be some military thing. But you really have totally taken the biscuit, Doug, by giving me a brain teaser that I've totally failed at. And I look forward to, if you're listening to this, you pointing out an answer to us. But maybe you guys out there are much quicker thinking, much deeper thinking than me, and know the answer to that. Well, I certainly will do a search after this blog and see if I can find the quote. But I'm pretty sure I won't. It won't happen. I won't find it, is what I'm trying to say. So we now come to what I watched on YouTube this week. As you know, some of you know, I'm starting to expand into looking at different things on YouTube. But I always have my favourites. So this week I've listened to my This Week in Retro, which is on every Saturday. Love the show. It has its good points, it has its bad points. This week's subject was mostly around the RISC operating system and the Archimedes. So there was something there for me to listen to, but there wasn't really anything new there for me. It's nice that the Archimedes and the RISC operating system, the chip itself, how it's being used now, is being mentioned, because a lot of us know, but then again there's an awful lot of people that don't know that our modern phones these days have got a chip inside it that used to be inside a home computer called the Archimedes. It's obviously changed drastically, but it's RISC architecture, reduced instruction set architecture, means that it's super quick and perfect for handhelds. So that was quite good. And then good old Techmoan, who I watch whenever he does his videos, he brought out this week a half-hour retrospective of a DJ CD player that Technics brought out called the SLDZ 1200. And this is where I start to learn, because I was never a DJ, but I did know that there were these CD players where you could scratch like vinyl, you know, moving the platter back and forth over the needle to give you that scratch effect, and that the big companies worked on DJ equipment to do that with CDs and memory cards. So it was interesting to see this one from Technics, which is deemed a failure, which are now coming down in price because it's only DJs that are selling them. You wouldn't ever have spent back in the day the type of money they wanted for these decks, and they're now selling them a little bit cheaper now to the mass market because they didn't do quite what they wanted it to do, and you can now do far more things with MP3s and FLAC and those type of file systems than we do with CD these days. So this equipment is really only for people that have a vested interest in historic audio equipment. I looked myself after the show and saw that, yeah, they're coming down in price to a couple of hundred. It was interesting to see how much these were, and they were in the thousands when they were first coming out. The things that were problematic are not going to be a problematic to me, because I don't intend to be a DJ, but there are features on it that I really, really like. The way that you can loop things, the way that you can scratch and all that sort of stuff. You could use it as an editing deck to do little things for, say, ringtones for your phone or whatever. And you'd have yet another top-end CD player, because the CD players in these would have needed to have been pretty top-end. So, yes, an idea or a thought is there for you to pick up old CD players, but this time buy the DJ equipment stuff. And then Denny put me on to a show that I'd never heard of, which is called Creature Features. Now, Creature Features have been on YouTube now for a number of years. I'd never done a search to find them. Apparently, they started off doing like an Elvira type show. If you've ever seen Elvira, she introduced a movie with a sketch at the beginning, a little bit about the film. You watch the film. At the end, there's a sketch at the end. Only they broadcast this on TV form in other countries, but it's not in this country. So they also repeat it on YouTube, and it's quite legitimate for them to do so because they've bought the rights to be able to publish the show. So there is no copyright infringement. So they do two versions of the film. One where it's just a cut down half an hour of the film with some jokes in between, or you actually watch the whole of the film just as if it was broadcast. So if they were doing the film Meteor with Sean Connery, you'd actually watch the 2-hour film, and you would see the bits at the beginning and bits at the end. But if you haven't got that time, there's the 30-minute segment version. Absolutely loved it. I've subscribed to it. There's a lot of films there that I've got, but it'd be nice to see the funny sketch side thing and little quips, and maybe I'll learn something about the film that I didn't know about. So that was great. And that's pretty much it for what I watched on YouTube. Other than I diversified with some of my little pet projects that I'm doing at the moment. So I've been doing some research into what is the best way to remove rust from tools. Now, my father had a lot of tools, chisels, screwdrivers. He had sort of like grippers which punctured holes in leather for you to have another notch in your belt, for a belt. All sorts of tools, and they've all gone rusty. They're in a drawer that's covered in rust. I keep looking at them and going to my mother, do you want me to chuck these out? And then I thought to myself, well, I've got a Dremel, and if anybody knows anything about a Dremel, it has the ability to not only sand and cut and stuff, it also polishes. So I could strip the rust away with a sander and then buff up with a wire wool spinner wheel. But I thought to myself, how do I get the rust off, the surface rust quicker? And of course I started looking at videos, and there's ways that you do it with certain acids. Now, there's a big contention over what's best, because obviously you've got steel, you've got iron. They all oxidize in a different way. So some use vinegar, some use caustic soda, some use hydrochloric acid. So I went to Amazon and started to buy some of these things. So I bought a very industrial strength vinegar, which, oh my God, that smells. And then I bought some caustic soda or baking soda, which I thought I could just mix with water and see how long that takes. And then I bought some hydrochloric acid, which, to be quite honest, is very, very cheap to get. But you have to have it couriered to you, because it's obviously a chemical that's hazardous. And it cost more to have it sent to me than it was to buy the bottle that I was going to buy. And it won't be here till Tuesday. But I've started to buy some plastic tubs, and I'm going to put some of these tools in, and I've been researching a lot more. So I do realise that you have to mix the hydrochloric acid with water of a certain of a certain amount, very strict on that amount, and you only put it in for hours, not 24 hours like you would with the vinegars and the caustic sodas that I've bought. And it's very, very easy then also to take the items that were rusty out of the bath of hydrochloric acid. You just immerse it back in water, because you need to bring the pH balance level down and neutralize the acid. Yeah, and then to get rid of the acid itself, just add an alkali, which would basically inert the acid. So easily right now, I'm fully aware that I need gloves, protective. I've already thought about the fact that I will need a face mask because of the hydrochloric gas that will come out when it's actually doing the rust. So I might need to do it outside when the weather is fine, because you don't want to fill your garage with hydrochloric gas. So I'm in that mood where I will then use my Black and Decker Workmate and use my Dremel to get rid of the surface rust. Probably go down to the bare metal and make them good as new. I've even bought a whetstone. So the other thing that I've been looking at is how to sharpen blades with a whetstone. And that's been very interesting, because what I didn't know is a whetstone comes in several different grits. One of the grits scrapes away huge chunks of metal, and then the finer you get to your grit, the more you're putting an edge on things. And so therefore, depending on how blunt your blades are and what type of metal they use and what type of edge, you're going to need to use your whetstone in a different way. The other thing is that you need to keep it at a certain angle and a certain amount of pressure. Other things is that you need to put the whetstone and immerse it in water for 10 minutes, because there is air in those whetstones, and you need to get that out. You need to keep the whetstone wet as well. That's why it's called a whetstone. All sorts of stuff. Fantastic amount of research I've done, and it's encouraged me to go out there and get off my arse and do something. So I might come back to you with how I got on. And then I've watched all my friends' YouTube stuff. So we've got LFC Gamer, who did a blog late yesterday. That was interesting. He was talking a little bit more about his football and the state of his channel at the moment, and that he might bring out a video today. You never know. So watch mine first, my blog, and then go and see if LFC's brought out his show. No, I'm only joking. But he's thinking about showing his collection of PlayStation games, or it could be that he'll do his cartridge system. He hasn't quite decided yet, but I'm quite excited to look out for that. And then we've got Down the Rabbit Hole. Now he's been very busy. He started off with a game, and he dressed up in his Judge Dredd outfit, because the game was called The Judge, but it was with a Y instead of a U, so The Judge, which looked quite interesting. I'm with him on the answer to whether he thought it was a good game or not. I saw totally the flaws and totally agreed with him, but I want you to go and see that, not me explain it to you, so to see what the full outcome on whether it was worth buying or not. Then he started talking about Twiglet, and Twiglets is something that us in the UK are well aware of. Other countries not so much so, but basically it's just it's called Twiglets because they look like twigs, but they're a wholemeal biscuit shaped in a twig with yeast extract smeared across the outside and then baked. Yeast extract, most famously being in our country Bovril or Marmite. So most people think that they're Marmite biscuits. Yeah, pretty close to that. Some people love them, some people hate them, but it's very much in that same mould as do you like Marmite or not. They are strong in taste. They're not distasteful. I just tend to find that after you've got to the halfway down the packet, I've gone off the flavour. It's like, wow, that really was strong. Now my whole taste buds are totally shocked and destroyed, and all I can taste now is Marmite or yeast extract. And it'll take a long time before I'll be able to taste cheese again or whatever. I tend to find it does destroy your palate, I think is the word I was looking for. And then he did a little review, retro review of a racing mini arcade handheld type thing. So it was very much in the mould of a arcade cabinet. It's got a little steering wheel. It was mostly racing games. Very entertaining, and I definitely recommend that you watch Down the Rabbit Hole. And then he entertained me by giving me not a link to a YouTube video because the link didn't come through, but he told me to look for something called Del Boy Kong. And I did that, and I was very amused. Thank you very much, Down the Rabbit Hole. I recommend that other people also go into their search engines now in YouTube and type in Del Boy Kong and basically see what you think of it. I was mildly entertained. I don't think I'd ever buy it. No. But it was very funny. Right. Then Mainmeister, he's been very busy as well. So on top of his normal waffles, he's done a retrospective of Atari VCS Invaders. So the very early 1981, 82, is it 81? Atari VCS system of Invaders. He loved it. I loved it. It's one of the must-have cartridges when I had my VCS system. Of course, I've done lots of research on it in the past, about how the sprite, how the invaders were displayed on the screen, what the programmer had to do to make Space Invaders work on such a archaic system compared to the custom nature of the arcade board that we all loved and put our money into. So that's definitely worth a watch. And then he did some game music. So outside of doing his Son of the Sid and the Sid shows, he decided that one night he'd invite us in to listen to some other music with a game-related aspect to it. So it's all music that would have been in games, but not necessarily done on the SID chip. So they could be remasters, they could be remixes, or they could be the actual tune themselves. He's not averse to doing that. And of course, this came about at the same time that a CD called Back in Time, which was produced by Chris Abbott, has reached its 25th anniversary. So you can go now to the archive library, type in Back in Time, and you can now download the first 3 CDs for free as MP3 and FLAC files, plus the booklet and everything. And the last 3 Back in Time CDs, that's CDs 4, 5 and 6, you can still buy on the c64audio.com website. Definitely recommend you getting those. After that, there's my mate Denny. Now, Denny hasn't given me a question this week, so I'm not quite sure what he thought of last week, but I can understand why he hasn't been able to when you look at his latest video, which is a retrospective of the VIC-20 game Matrix, and oh my god, it is 30 minutes long. The production values are equivalent to what you'd see on a broadcast TV. Graphics everywhere, full of history, loads and loads of information in regards to the different versions of Matrix, even to the point of showing inspired Matrix clones that you can buy in modern times. Totally in awe of the production value. The link is always in my description, as into a lot of my friends' channels. They're all in my description. It's one that you must watch, even if you've got just a tint of knowing about gaming history and Jeff Minter in particular. But just sit back, relax, and take in that one guy did this video. Absolutely wonderful. And then we get to Robert's Retro Gaming, where I always find his channel very entertaining because there are so many Atari 8-bit games that I never got to play all of them. And he was playing a couple of corkers this week. One called The Gauntlet, which I thought looked like River Raid at first. And he was having immense fun trying to work out what to do in this game. And then, of course, he did, I think, Frogger. He's done his Minecraft shows. plus his Dwarf Fortress. And although I haven't watched any more Dwarf Fortress since last week, I am itching to nearly buy that. So he might have got another, there might be another sale and then out of me on Steam, and then that will mean that I'll be watching his videos a lot more. Oh, Robert, but you still, Robert, and I don't know whether you're watching or not, but you haven't answered my questions, you haven't done my retrospective on Yars. There's a number of things you need to look at the last couple of weeks and start answering, buddy, some of my questions to you. I hope you do get the message that I'm really looking forward to some of the things I'm asking you to do. And then that finishes what I watched on YouTube this week. But what have I been watching on TV? So I've watched The Last of Us. We've got up to episode 3. It was a very emotional episode. Another episode that was beyond the 55 minutes that you'd normally get in a show, because the second episode was sort of a tag on to the very first. The third one is a character building emotional roller coaster, which will push the story on from this point. It's sort of like what I consider to be if you were reading a comic book, it would be, meanwhile, in this area of the land, this was going on, which has a slight in-line with the main story of the two characters that you have in The Last of Us. Definitely worth a watch. Definitely high on characterization, not so much in the zombies. So if you're into your zombies or the infected, this is a story you could miss and still watch The Last of Us all the way through to the end and miss this episode, because you won't have missed much. But from my point of view, you'd be doing yourself a disservice. And then I've completed Lockwood & Co., which is on Netflix, which, to be quite honest, I think it's worth a watch. I'm not going to go into great detail, other than to let you know that it was very entertaining, high value, obviously it's on Netflix, special effects everywhere, not offensive in any way, not fantastic like The Last of Us is, and it's not intended to compete with that. It's just a very good show, something to clear your palate with after you've watched The Last of Us. And then we come to my own videos. I've only done a blog and one update to one of the Vampire Survivor type games, because Army of Ruin had a patch come out on Thursday which added a whole new area, more weapons, more trinkets, performance increases, and more quality of life to the interface game itself. And they gave it away free as a major update. They then produced and updated their roadmap, because in July the game will be what they consider to be version 1.0, which is out as a product that has been bug tested and deemed to be a game to purchase. What we've got at the moment now is something called early access. From that point of view, the price is substantially cheaper at the moment, definitely worthy of your attention. I consider it the gem of last year, the game that I nearly almost missed. And then this week I've been playing Valheim on Rocket Bunny's server. I've been playing Army of Ruin, of course. Mini Motor Racing Evo, which is sort of like a super sprint type game, which I'm really not addicted to, but really fun to play. And Skyforce Reloaded as my little shoot 'em up pleasure this week. But I'm very interested in two games that are coming out, or you'll be able to get a demo soon. One is called Undisputed, which is a boxing game. And if you think about boxing games as a genre, we haven't had one really since Fight Night Championship. So what you need to understand about boxing is that you'd think it would have a lot more games out there, but there don't seem to be. And then there is a World Boxing Manager, and a World Boxing Manager is a different type of game where you're actually just managing and you don't control the boxers. But the one I'm really interested in is a game called Infected Free Zone. Now, this is a zombie game, but it uses Google Maps. So the game would be a zombie game where you have to clear the undead and have to survive. But you could download Google Maps and have it in your street. Or you could actually choose a part of London or a part of America, or have it on an Air Force base, or basically in any setting that you want. And it turns Google Maps into the area that you're going to be playing the game. So that's going to be a demo next weekend on Steam, and I'm really looking forward to that. And now we're going to come across the topic for this week. So the topic this week is going to be Quincy ME. I really do love doing these topics and doing some research on them. And Quincy ME is definitely a show that influenced me and entertained me as a child. So it was produced October 3rd, 1976, and its last broadcast was May 11th, 1983. It lasted 8 seasons and it generated 148 episodes. So this was a well-known show. But in the UK, it was broadcast on the ITV network in 1977. But due to the regional structure of the ITV network, it was shown on different days and in different times. It was repeated after its initial run on BBC One during the late 80s and the early 90s. But again, shown in an afternoon slot at a time where you're waiting for the kiddies to come home just after lunchtime. It's sort of like a dead area for you to watch. In the 2000s, the repeats were twice a day on ITV3, one at 8 a.m. and one at 2 p.m. The show then moved to Universal's own channel, so Universal broke out its own channel and put it on Freeview, and Quincy moved there and was on Sunday mornings at 8 o'clock and then repeated at 4 p.m. or 8 a.m. the next day, and then through the week. Its last run was on ITV in 2016. In the UK, the TV listings listed the show as Quincy, not Quincy ME. As in the UK, a medical examiner, which is what ME stands for, is a forensic scientist. So, although the show was called Quincy ME, we didn't recognise the word medical examiner. It's a Glenn A. Larson production, and it was created by Glenn A. Larson and Lou Shaw. So what's the synopsis of this show? So Dr. Quincy is a highly proficient medical examiner, or a forensic pathologist, for the Los Angeles Coroner's Office. He's working to ascertain facts and reasons for possible suspicious deaths. Quincy is always up against a deadline. It's set by the law of the county, and so is in constant conflict with his boss, who's Dr. Robert Aston, or Lieutenant Monaghan if it was a crime case. The relationship between these three characters in the first 2 seasons is quite volatile. Yes, they don't conflict with each other, but they basically bump heads against each other quite an awful lot. But the later seasons and episodes showed a softening of these three characters, a much more respect, professional-wise, of their relationships. In most episodes, Quincy took it upon himself to conduct the investigation. So, with little or no help from his boss or the police, he would go out and try and investigate what's going on. Now, this is where his lab assistant came in, because he took on the brunt of all the legwork while Quincy was out there trying to investigate and find the missing information that would explain why this person died. Now, his assistant was called Sam Fujiyama. And I always thought to myself, it'd be really good to have a partner like that, because this guy could go out, have dinners, lunches, turn up at people's places, when he should be working on pathology. But he's left it all for his friend to do. It's almost like he's his own personal slave. I always liked that about the show. It was like, poor old Sam, he's doing all the legwork again. So, as originally conceived as part of NBC's mystery movie format, the first couple of seasons contained elements of who done it and how do I catch them. So what I mean by that is, it wasn't a series which was 60 minutes and it was on every week. It was a movie of the week, and it eventually evolved into a series. A who done it or how do I catch them is different to many other crime thrillers. So this is more about, you see the crime occur, you watch as someone like Quincy breaks down the clues that tells you who did it or how it happened. I always like those. Columbo is a famous one of those because you know who it is straight away. It's just working out how Columbo got there in the end, knowing full well who it was. So the first couple of seasons contained elements of whodunit and how catch 'em, and concentrated on Quincy's own investigation. A typical episode would find Quincy determining the actual murderer instead of the LAPD, or the real cause of the unusual or suspicious death. Later seasons introduced themes of social responsibilities, conducting investigations into disreputable plastic surgeons, or flaws in the law such as the dumping of hazardous waste, or autism, or teenage alcoholism. Yes, what we have to understand here is that where other shows would have a morality sort of statement, this particular show wanted to attack dumbness in the law. So these were shows that were adapted from real coroners. They got their input from them and turned into stories to reflect social, deprivation in our society. So, and to better ourselves, to enforce those laws, to better those laws for teenage alcoholism, get the help that they need. In fact, Quincy was one of the first dramatic series to use a format like this to further our social agenda. So it was a first for all of that. Many crime dramas use rudimentary evidence like fingerprints. Quincy was the first show to present an in-depth forensic evidence, paving the way for later shows like CSI, Diagnosis Murder, and others. So really, to be quite honest, if there was no Quincy, it's doubtful that we'd have come across shows like CSI. CSI has got such a big following, it's unbelievable. Quincy was that show for us during the 70s and 80s. So the characters, we have Quincy. So what is Quincy? Well, Quincy is very resolute, highly proficient, ethical, excitable, analytical, a bit bullish, very gruff. Now, there's a little note that I put here because this is something that I didn't know, and I went back and found out it's quite true. His first name is not known, but in the first few seasons he wore a badge which said Dr. R. Quincy on it, and on his office it also had Dr. R. Quincy. Nobody knows what R stood for. People have asked the actor Jack Klugman, who played Quincy, what does the R stand for, and he said, don't know. It was never written in the script. So unfortunately we're never going to know now, but there we go. So he lived on a boat. He lived on a moored up boat at the marina near Denny's restaurant. Denny's restaurant is one of those places where you would see sometimes Quincy relax and try to get enthusiasm into why something was puzzling him. Denny being a character that very much seemed a bit shady to me, but there we go. He drove around the city in a motor vehicle, which was a 1976 AMC Matador station wagon. Now, I always thought to myself, why doesn't he drive around in a much posher car? He does have an antique car, but you hardly ever see it. He drove around in the city car as why not? Why do I want to spend my own money on petrol when I've got the city car? So it made sense, really. He was a retired captain in the US Navy. There's a couple of shows that explain his background. He was married once, but he lost his wife to cancer. That was explained in one of the very early shows where it was a movie. He had many girlfriends. Now, this is something that I was very, later on, amusing about, because this guy seemed to look about 60, and he was going out with air stewardesses in their 20s and 30s. I didn't look at it as creepy or anything, but I thought, how the hell does he get all these attractive women? They softened him up a little bit towards the end. He did marry again in one of the later shows, like around season 7, season 8. And I believe he sold his boat as well and settled down in one of the last seasons. Some of the other characters, so there's Dr. Robert Astin. He was very strict, proficient. He was an acting medical examiner when needed. He maintains the order and the budget of the coroner's office, follows the rules. He easily got rattled when something wasn't going the way of what was needed. But he softened his approach when it came to Quincy. I think he recognised his professionalism and his passion for getting to the bottom of something, even though it was to the detriment of the department itself. Then you got Lieutenant Frank Monaghan. He was very strict, very lawful, a rule follower, demanding, very gruff, also very quick to judge. It always seemed like if the evidence is pointing to this guy, then it's got to be this guy. He was that type of lieutenant. It doesn't matter that there could have been another reason that something occurred, or that it might not be murder. He would be bullish enough to think all the evidence points this way, so I don't really want to hear anything else about it. And then you got that Dr. Sam Fujiyama, which is his assistant. I think the actor's name was Robert Ito. He was the fun character for me because I just felt so sorry for him. He was the lab assistant, very adept, meticulous, organised, a workaholic. My God, he had to be a rule follower and very loyal to Quincy. So we're getting towards the end of Quincy now a little bit before I do a roundup. The theme music was actually designed by Glenn A. Larson and Rebecca Cardigan Jones, and the theme was called "Wanna Wind Up Gorgeous." I didn't know the name of the title of it until I did some research on this. I know that the theme went through several incarnations over the 8 seasons. There weren't that many changes, but it did change a little bit. What I noticed is that the music in the show was stock music. This was music that was done by various artists and brought into the show, and not really done by one particular composer. Every episode was filmed in 35mm film, so it was quite a high production value, which means that it could be brought out again in high definition much easier than a video show, which basically doesn't cater so well for trying to upscale anything. Unfortunately, this is where we come to the media. It was released in the USA totally, so you can get seasons 1 to 8 in America, and those seasons came out between 2005 and 2015. But when you get to other countries like Britain, seasons 1 and 2 are in the UK in 2005, and you couldn't get season 3 until 2013. And then that's where it stops. There is no season 4, 5, 6, 7 or 8, which means that you're trapped in the very early areas of Quincy. Also, it's not on Blu-ray. So I'm looking forward to that being corrected. Quincy, just by the very nature of the fact that it came out with 8 seasons, shows its positivity as a show. To me, it's one of those shows where it was a must-watch for me. I looked at him not like the Doctor in Doctor Who, where he was sort of like a grandfather figure. It was the sort of figure where I wanted to be him. I wanted to be that person that said, I know full well you're lying to me, and I'm going to prove it, because you're not going to get away with this. It's murder. You know it's murder, and basically, I'm going to catch you out, and I'm going to not waste a single second of breath on you anymore. I'm going to go out that door, expect to see me in court. I love that nature of what he was, and he reminded me of my woodwork teacher, Mr. Murray. Very gruff character. Hated it when you didn't put the tools back, all of that sort of stuff. Very, very strict. But it's just, you saw the fun side of him as well. To me, it was a show where I wanted to see science used to tell the full story rather than the story told to me at the very beginning. So there were many aspects of it, and Jack Klugman was just a fantastic actor. He's now sadly left us. I think it was cancer that took him away from us. He was a great actor. He was in 12 Angry Men as a film. He was in The Odd Couple, the TV series of the movie, and a number of things. And of course, he lost his voice later on through smoking. He was a heavy smoker. I think he had a voice box later on. Very sad way to go. But he left behind a legacy that I think that everybody should enjoy. And that's the end of my topic. I do hope you go away now and reminisce a little bit about Quincy, and if you've never seen it, get off your ass and watch a couple of episodes. It really is one of those shows that, you know, it was repeated well, but should be around a lot more than it is. And then we come to some of the things that arrived this week, but I'm just going to recap on last week because I did my show on Randall and Hopkirk, and the one thing I didn't do is just show you that I'm a big Randall and Hopkirk fan by showing you the soundtrack and the Blu-ray of it. This week, the second book of my Ultimate Spider-Man omnibus turned up. So last week I showed you this omnibus because it was a replacement because it got damaged. It's taken 10 years for the second volume to come out. This is volume 2, and it covers books 40 to 71. So if I put the two volumes together, I've got issues 1 to 71. I believe, therefore, if they were to continue doing these volumes, I would need 4 volumes because there was 150, I think. And this goes up to 71. But if I was to look in the years, it's taken 10 years for it to get from volume 1 to volume 2. Then we're looking that I'm going to be a very old man when I've got them all. Then this is the only 4K or Blu-ray disc that's come in, is the Steelbook of Young Sherlock Holmes, a film that doesn't get mentioned an awful lot, but it's a very early Industrial Light and Magic special effects film. Quite entertaining, definitely for kiddies, but it's got some horror bits in there actually. And then this has arrived this week. Now this is just my technical aspect of me. I've bought myself a HDMI matrix splitter. What is a HDMI matrix splitter? So if I want to carry on doing stuff for you guys and I want to do reviews and all that sort of stuff, then I have to consider that many of my devices require an input for which my capture card only has one port. This one is what they call a 2x4 matrix splitter, and that is because on the back, I don't know if you can see there, it's got 4 HDMI inputs and 2 outputs. Now you'd think to yourself, why do you want 2 outputs? So there can be a certain circumstance where your capture card, okay, will only capture at a certain resolution, like 1080p, and the device that you want to capture is 4K. That means you'll need to downscale. The other thing is that you'll want 2 outputs because you'll want the normal telly to show you what the native picture looks like, and you also want to capture it. So you want the capture port free for yourself, and you also want it to be shown on the telly as the sort of like the main live sort of like broadcast, if you see what I mean. So this has the ability to not only show it natively on the telly, but it also has the ability to downscale for the capture device. And it's got 4 inputs, and in those 4 inputs I can flip between them and have it do exactly that for every single one of those devices. or I could just have two standard outputs with no change or downscaling required. So it's very, very flexible. Um, and it's going to help me, I think, no end in regards to adding a bit of flexibility to some of the reviews I'm going to be doing. And we come to the end of the blog. Thank you so much for listening. A little bit shorter this week. Well, it's getting a little bit easier to make that shortness. But I just hope that you continue to comment, continue to watch. I really have enjoyed this morning talking and reminiscing about things. And I'm going to give you my salute now till next week. And thanks very much for watching, guys. Bye bye.